Um, Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Stony Creek Bands. It is really good to see some of your faces and have you here joining us today. We are being joined with composer Alex Shapiro, joining us from Washington State, correct? That's
Yep.
where your island is at.
That's right.
And the composer of Off the Edge, which we've been working on a bit as we're looking to put things together virtually here, still working some of the kinks out, but looking forward to the idea of it as we're moving forward.
Yep.
And so folks, we're going to do a very similar setup that we did last week with our last chat, and that is if you can just keep your microphones muted. If you do have a question, go ahead and type it in the group chat off to the side here. And that way, as you've got a question, you don't even have to type your question in. You can just let me know that you have a question, and I'll be more than happy to give you the floor. So that way you can ask your question directly and unmute your mic for that time period.
Great.
But before we get started with some questions for the students, though, I'm wondering if you could just give us a little bit of your background and what led up to Off the Edge as the piece that we're looking at.
What led up to this wacky thing? My background is really mixed. It's a little bit more mixed than a lot of concert music composers, as you can probably tell by this piece, because in addition to doing nothing but concert music, serious music, we don't call it that, by the way, but in addition to doing concert music for the past 22 years or whatever it's been, before that, my career was in commercial music. And I've done a lot of film scoring, TV scoring, commercials, corporate videos, rock songs, everything, you name it, I think I have done it. And I love that. It's really fun. And I encourage this with everybody to get interested in all kinds of music and play all kinds of music. And if you're writing, and I encourage every one of you to write music. You don't have to even notate it. You can just record it. You can organize sound, put stuff together, see what happens. If you've got a phone, you've got already a recording system right there,
Mm-hmm.
The free apps are amazing. So I did a lot of work in a lot of different genres and arenas. And so what happens in my concert music life now, and particularly in my works for wind band, which are more oriented toward younger players, I love the opportunity to put all kinds of music together. So now, Off the Edge, as you guys have already heard, is pretty much a pop-oriented EDM kind of piece, pretty straight ahead. But some of my other pieces, like I've got a piece called Tight Squeeze that combines an Afro-Cuban Latin groove with a 12-tone serial row, and I can tell you, I can tell you what that means. It just means that it's a very chromatic way of writing that dates back from over 100 years ago, where composers like Webern and Arnold Schoenberg devised ways of writing music where no notes repeat themselves until you've used up all the notes, both horizontally and vertically. It's like playing Sudoku, except with music. Anyway, it ends up being what we call in that day, it was considered atonal, meaning non-tonally centered music. We call it now pantonal, meaning pan means all from the Greek. Mm-hmm. And you want to use all the notes, right? And you can use all the notes no matter what kind of music you're writing. And so Tight Squeeze, you can go onto my website and hear it. There's an example of a very chromatic piece of music, but it's to a beat. And some of my music is much more symphonic sounding and traditional sounding, and more like what we call tone poems, where it's lyrical and the piece just glides along like liquid compass or immersion, and it's telling you a story. So it's really fun to have that background. And Off the Edge is just sort of one slice of something fun that I thought would fill a need in the band repertoire. Just for this thing, I had the opportunity to write an electroacoustic piece for younger students, and I thought, wow, this will be really fun. So that's the back. And when I was growing up, and still, I love to dance. And I love dance music. And I'm not saying that this is the be-all and end-all dance track, but it's sort of edging in that direction. And so there you go. You can dance to it if you want. You can sing to it if you want. So that's Excellent. The background of it.
Excellent. One of the questions, so I had some students submit questions ahead of time as well, just to help get the ball rolling. And one of the questions that was asked of Off the Edge is that it almost sounds like it has a marching band feel at times. And they were wondering if you were inspired by any marching bands or experience or seeing them, or if any of that happened to go into the creation of the piece.
That's a cool question. I love marching bands. I've never actually written for marching band. And when I was writing this, I didn't hear marching band in my head, but after I was producing the demo and everything, I realized, wow, I think this could sound cool for marching band. So I wasn't thinking about it at the time when I was writing it, but after the fact, I agree with whoever makes that observation. It would kind of be cool for marching band, wouldn't it? It's pretty straight ahead. You can march to it a little fast, probably too fast. But anyway, it was fun. That's a good question.
So another question that was submitted ahead of time was, when you're composing a piece like Off the Edge or one of your other works, how long does it often take to compose? Do some pieces have a longer process or a shorter process? And do you get started by writing the melody, or is it another piece of musical material? Like, can you walk through the composition process a little bit?
Sure. And that's another really interesting question, because for every composer, it's different. And usually for all of us, for every piece, it's different. Some pieces don't take longer than others, but really very, very few pieces just write themselves. It does take a lot of time. I mean, Off the Edge, I probably spent 3 or 4 months, working on soup to nuts. I think a lot of the process begins in the subconscious. And this is something that's true for all of us, no matter what kind of work we're doing. And I want you guys to keep that in mind, that the subconscious is a really powerful thing. And it works on problems and assignments, or in my case, commissions with deadlines. It works on those things even when you're doing something else, whether that's brushing your teeth in the morning or writing a whole nother piece of music that's unrelated to, the one that's coming up. That somehow that work starts to organize itself. And with my work, everything is written pretty much vertically at the same time. And by vertical, I mean the rhythms and the harmonies and the melodies. And in this case, because my pieces are electroacoustic, meaning that they have a pre-recorded accompaniment track, that is written at the same time as the music. Now, with a pop song, I'm going to just call it that for lack of a better term, with pop song format like Off the Edge, that is a very straight ahead, cut and dry kind of formula of, you've got your rhythm section stuff, you've got the middle stuff, you got the melodies, you got counterpoint, and the score. And even in the score, there's one sheet, which you may have already seen, that kind of breaks down the chorus and the bridge and the verses and all that. Mm-hmm. That structure is pretty straight ahead. But even with more traditionally classical and symphonic things, I'm still writing very much enmeshed and vertically. So instead of just coming up with a melody by itself, usually the minute I come up with the melody, I'm also hearing the harmony, because everything is interconnected. And when I'm writing, usually the first thing I'll do with any electroacoustic piece is I imagine what kind of journey sonically am I going to take my musicians, you guys, and our audience, our collective audience on, and your fearless leader at the podium, right? What's she going to be doing? Because she's got to study the score. I think about all of that, and I make determinations about what do I feel like expressing, because we write music to communicate. And sometimes it's very lighthearted stuff like Off the Edge, and other times it's very serious stuff, more somber. And so I spend the first 2 or 3 weeks often just putting together my digital sound palette of what are these sounds that I'm going to use to create the mood I'm looking for, because I program most of these sounds myself. Either I sample them, on my phone, and dump them into the computer, which is something all of you can do. It's really fun, and I encourage you to experiment with that. Or I'll choose sounds from my palette here in these various libraries, and I'll choose them as the starting point, and then I tweak them. I program off of what's an existing sound, and I make it my own. So I come up with that whole palette, and what that palette is, in the case of an electroacoustic piece, is an additional and equal section of the band. So just like woodwinds and brass, they each have their own sound. The percussion section can be a whole load of different things, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody has their own sound. The saxes have their own sound. Well, I'm writing in the case of pretty much all of my pieces to create sounds that I can't get out of you. In the case again of Off the Edge, it's not the most colorful example because it's a rhythm track. And you could argue that, well, you know, a lot of the sounds are very techno, of course, and those are highly electronic that I can't get out of the live instruments. But things I've got, you know, one of you plays kick drum in this, you know, and, you know, that can obviously be done live, not just electronically. I have it both. But there are a lot of times when I'm using my electronics, most of the time, to create sounds where I can't get them from live players or live instruments. So it creates this balance. And as a result, the piece itself, when it's performed, the track is as loud as the band because it's just another equal section. And that sound, to take it a little further for you to imagine this, that for those of you who haven't done an electroacoustic piece before, the sound triangulates. It's designed to triangulate to the audience, not to us on the stage, but to the audience. So when you're, even in the best of circumstances, with an acoustic piece of music, no matter what instrument you're playing in your very large band, you're pretty much only hearing yourself and the people around you. It's hard to get a very even idea of what the people across the stage are doing, right? And even for the conductor, it's very hard for her to hear what everything that's imaging completely properly as it's going to be heard out from, you know, to the audience. And so you make educated guesses on balance, et cetera, which get very much stressed with you know, having to do an electroacoustic track along with it, you know, to do an accompaniment track with it. You're guessing as the conductor, how is this going to balance? But magically, it usually does. And the beneficiaries are the audience, not us. So even when you eventually do all get together, whether it's for my piece or another piece, another, let's say, electroacoustic piece, when you're all physically in the same room together, you'll be interested to know that you have to have faith that it's going to actually come together and sound pretty cool out in the audience, because from your perspective on the stage, you're thinking, why am I not playing here? Or why am I playing this? Or, you know, there might seem to be holes that the track is doing, or you might not hear the balance. So I always joke that composing and playing are faith-based occupations because you have to have faith that it's all going to work out and that I planned this out. But that's a lot of the composition process, is thinking about the trip, the journey you want to take your listeners and your players on, and then mapping out how are you going to create those sounds. And also, you know what else has a lot to do with it is the duration of the piece. You know, we know the instrumentation. If somebody commissions you for a piece of work, they'll say, I need a string quartet. Great, you know what those instruments are. I need a wind band piece. You know what those instruments are, pretty much. You can add or subtract a few. Well, the other thing that's part of the given framework of any piece that determines what a composer is going to do is the duration. Because if a piece is only 3 minutes long, there are only a few places you can go. And if you want it to sound balanced, just like a pop tune like Off the Edge, you're going to repeat some of your ideas. You know, you're going to make it balanced to make it work. If you have 20 minutes to write a piece, if they want something much longer, guess what? You can go a lot of different places. And then you have to give thought to, okay, what path am I going to take to wend all these ideas together? So duration has a lot to do with the compositional process as well. I'll stop here because, as you can tell, I love composing and I love sharing the excitement for it.
Absolutely. It's fascinating. Well, that's actually a good lead into our next question. And I'm writing up follow-up questions here as we go for later on. But another student question was, and this leads into duration very well, how is it different writing for commercial music, like things that are shorter, like those short commercial jingles or other things that you've done throughout your career?
Sure. Great question. It's very, very different for several reasons. Number one, when you're writing for commercial music, that almost always, virtually always, means you're writing for someone else's vision, the director, the screenwriter, the producer, right? You're writing for everybody else except for you. Now, of course, you are throwing your creativity into it. It's your music, but the impetus is not coming from within you. It's not me sitting down one day and saying, oh, I want to write a symphony. You know, here are my ideas. It's not that at all. It's more like, I have to sell this mug of coffee. Okay, I have to sell this to you. And this is how the mug has been shot and lit. And there's this woman coming in to grab it with her hand, and it moves from here to there. And then she stands up. And that in my 30 seconds of, let's say, a commercial for coffee, I have to basically do what the director wants me to do and transport you, the people who I want to buy the coffee, to transport you to something, in this case, attractive that will make you want to buy the coffee, right? So that's probably going to be some interesting kind of music that will move along with the woman's hand moving the mug, and then she sips the coffee, and how many times have we seen this? The music kind of swoons as she's having such a great moment sipping this delicious coffee, right? And that's all the psychology of advertising and the psychology that music plays a part in any commercial application with selling coffee or deodorant or anything else. It's making people want to be part of that experience and run out and get that that item. Now,
Sure.
in film scoring, it's very different, but also you're marching to someone else's drummer. In film scoring, what are you doing? You are adding music to make a scene that the audience is watching affect them emotionally in a very particular way. And that way is dictated not by you, usually, the composer, but by the director's wishes. The director is going to say, I want this to be really scary. And I'm going to take my cue from that. Now, the same scene, literally, it could be a woman walking through a park. Let's just take that. Imagine that in your mind. A little scene of a woman walking through a park. There's nothing else except trees and the woman. Now, if I score that with scary music, you know something bad is about to happen to that woman, right? Think about it. And if I score it with lovely music, you know she's having a nice day and everything's fine. The psychology of composing is fascinating to me. And it's one of the things I really enjoy so much about the process. With concert music, where there is nobody else except for me deciding what the music needs to do, I get to be my own film director in a sense. I get to decide, what do I want to make the audience feel? So there's an example. So the difference between scoring for commercial music means you're serving other people's vision of what the music needs to accomplish. And in concert music, you're serving your own vision. And both are wonderful pursuits. They're just different.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I want to go back a little bit when you were talking about getting started composing, and you said that you were throwing some things on your phone and that anybody could do that. And so what are some of the apps or some of the things that you use in order to get some of those initial thoughts down? And then how do you take that and then work with it onto the computer to create a piece?
Easiest thing that I'm assuming everybody's got a phone. Everybody got a phone? Probably. So if you have a phone, I'm a iPhone person, but I'm sure this is true on Android as well. It always comes with a basic recording app. I mean, incredibly simple, hit record. And these days, because of the technology, the recording is really good. It's actually really good. The quality of the microphone and what it's picking up. So, I don't even need anything fancy schmancy on an app. I take my little recording app, hit record, and whether I'm sitting at the piano coming up with an idea or in the car singing really out of tune, but I know what it means, singing an idea and saying la la la, and the French horns go yada yada yada, or in the case of what I was mentioning before, that's when what I just described is when you have your own idea in your head that you just want to convey and write down later. But when you make what are called samples, when I take, let's say, the sound of this coffee mug and my nails on it, that's a sound. You can't probably hear it very well now, but it's a sound. And let's say if I really like that sound and I think, ooh, I could use that sound in a piece, because why not? Everything around us is potentially music. So then I just take my phone and I hit record and I record it literally. And then I email myself. It's so simple. You can do it when you sync your phone, or if you want it really fast, I just email myself the sound file, and then it's in my computer. I open it up in Google Mail or whatever on this computer. I've got two computers, the one I'm looking at you now on, which is more for administrative stuff, and then my rig, as I call it here, which is where all the music is made, all the sausage is made, as we say. And so I'll open up the sound file here, just like you can do on your laptops, and I drag it into, let's say I could drag it into a free application like GarageBand or Audacity or Reactor. Those are, or Ableton Lite. Those are four that come to mind. I think they're all free. And I know GarageBand comes with your Macs, if you guys are on Macs, any of you.
Mhm.
And there must be a PC equivalent, which I'm just not a PC person, so I don't know. But at any rate, you open up a track and you drag it's usually a stereo audio file, just drag it into the stereo track, and suddenly there it is. Now, if you happen to have a little keyboard, it can be even a little thing, or you can from your phone even. They make, controller keyboards. You can use one on your phone remotely to play the sound, on different keys. Or you can just play with it like I have here with audio files and chop audio files up and move it around. But that's the first step, and it is so much fun. And I want to encourage you to do it because it's easy, it's free, and it's fun. What's better than that?
That's excellent. So going back to another student question in a different direction this time, can you talk a little bit about what it was like going to Juilliard and some of your earlier music experiences?
Well, I went to Juilliard pre-college, which was when I was maybe just a little older than you guys. I don't know. Graduated from Juilliard pre-college because I grew up in New York City, as we were talking about earlier before we started. I grew up in Manhattan, so I was really lucky. There were really good music schools there. I went to Manhattan School of Music after that. These are two terrific conservatories. And I had a wonderful experience. I was a composition major at both. I was a little, mutant geek when I was a kid. I started writing music when I was 9. And not good music. I was no Mozart. I was terrible, but I loved it. And I think there's a key point there that when you love something, stick with it. And if you happen to have any talent with it, that will blossom. Sometimes we love something and we're not particularly good at it, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It just means maybe we shouldn't do it for a career. But in my case, I was lucky that, I was okay at it and I loved doing it. So I kept learning to do it better. And so I kept studying it. So I had a great time in conservatory and very supportive teachers and very supportive students around me and friends, many of whom are still my friends to this day, all these years later. And, but, you don't have to go to school to be a composer. That is something that's fairly internal. You learn a bag of tricks. You learn how to use the ideas by going to school. But I think that being a musician and being, you need to study to play the clarinet well or play the trumpet well. But at a certain point, your own talent takes over and you figure out what a beautiful sound is. You're innately gifted, with that. Many of you are. And it's the same thing with writing. Nobody can really teach somebody to be a wonderful composer. It's sort of innate. Either they sort of get it or they don't. You can teach somebody to have more tools and use them a little bit better. But ultimately, the school thing is secondary to the doing. And always remember that for anything that all of you are interested in, you want to really apply yourself and stick with it. And if you enjoy it, you're going to get better at it. And you never know what ends up being your life's passion. So that's a good thing.
Another student question was, if we have some students that are interested in doing some composing. In fact, one of the things that we do as a midterm project for 2 out of our 3 ensembles is they write short pieces of chamber music for our middle school students, which our middle school students then go and play later on in the school year. The question pertains to writing for instruments that are not your primary instruments. And how did you learn how to write for those other instruments? And do you have any tips or resources for students who are looking to compose using a wide gamut of instrumentation?
Great question. Great question. Because yes, we all tend to, and this is a good thing, start writing for the instrument you know best. That's a great way to start. But at a certain point, you branch out and you start writing for everybody. How do you do that? The first and best thing you can possibly do is listen, listen, listen. Listen to as much music, and especially for the instruments, that you're going to be writing for, as you possibly can in all genres. You will probably get a particularly excellent sense of an instrument's capability by listening to jazz or classical, quote unquote, music, because, there's just a whole lot going on there instrumentally. But if you're writing for trombone and tuba and you happen to be an oboe player, there's 2 things at least. Well, there are a lot of things going on there that are different. But one thing is, of course, the sound and the range of the instruments is very different, and also the technical way of playing those instruments is very different from what you know as an oboist. So what you want to learn once you listen to whatever the instruments are that you're interested in writing for and learning more about. You listen, 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 open up a book and literally learn what the ranges are, because every instrument pretty much has a definitive range. Usually there's a definitive low note, although tubas have pedal tones, what are called pedal tones, and things like, oh, they basically sound like big farts, okay? But the big fart tone. You can tell them I said that. But anyway, there's usually a definite low note, like a bassoon goes to a low B flat. That's all it's going to do. And high notes can sometimes have to do with the capability of the player, depending on the instrument. But there are ranges where instruments sound particularly good, and each one's different. And there are ranges where an otherwise beautiful instrument sounds like a dying cow. For instance, the contrabassoon can actually go way, way up like a bassoon, but trust me, you don't want to go there unless you're looking for a dying cow sound. So, you write lower for the contrabassoon. But interestingly, I mentioned bassoon before. Bassoon has a spectacular and even range where not only is the low and middle parts of a bassoon gorgeous, but the high range in the hands of a good player is absolutely beautiful. Very beautiful. Listen to, a classic one that everybody always points to is a composer named Igor Stravinsky, wrote a piece that premiered in 1913 called The Rite of Spring. It's fabulous. And it opens up with a very famous high bassoon line, which at the time was a very high note that now bassoonists play all the time. But at the time, I think it's an A, right? And at the time, it opens up with a very high note in the range. And it's a gorgeous, gorgeous, haunting lyrical line. So there's an example of learning ranges and listening, okay? The other thing that I really encourage you to do is, and I did this all the time, I still do it, but I did it especially when I was starting out and writing a lot of chamber music. I would hang out with musicians and ask them to play their instrument for me. And most musicians are thrilled to do that for you. Grab your friend who is, the trumpet player, and you've never written for trumpet, and ask her or him to sit down with you and show you how the valves work, show you what works on a trumpet and what doesn't work so well. You will learn so much from talking to an instrumentalist, and they usually are really happy to show you. When I wrote my tuba sonata, I've got a piece called Music for Two Big Instruments. It's for tuba and piano. And it was commissioned by the principal tubist of the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and then it was recorded by the principal tubist of the New York Philharmonic. These are mega, mega instrumentalists, right? These are the rock stars of the tuba. Well, I was delighted that I was commissioned to do this, but I didn't know the tuba particularly well. I sat down with the tubist, and Norm Pearson is his name, and I sat, 5 feet away from him as he showed me everything on the tuba and taught me, basically just by being in close proximity to it, really, it got me to sort of physically connect with the instrument in a way that was not just intellectual, knowing the range, but very visceral. That's a good word to use. By the way, for anybody interested in writing for tuba, and of course some of you play it, the best thing that Norm Pearson ever said to me was, the tuba can play anything the trumpet can play. Now think about that, because we think about trumpets going da 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 da, right, really fast. Guess what? Tubas can do that too. But most people don't know that. They think of tubas having long, low held notes, or pa pa pa, But no. A good tubist can play all kinds of things. It's a very agile instrument. And here's another tuba hint. I'm pushing the tuba on you now because it needs more repertoire. It's a great instrument. Tuba has a gorgeous lyrical upper end in the hands of a good player. In a bad player, it's going to sound like that dying cow. But in a good player, it'll sound really beautiful. So don't shy away from edging up in your upper range for tuba. Especially, tubas come in different sizes. They have the big bore tubas like the C tuba or the B flat tuba. But then the concert tubas are in F and E flat. And they have smaller bores. They're a little bit more like a large euphonium in that sense. I mean, they're bigger than a euphonium, but you know what I'm talking about. And so the smaller the bore, the more agility they have.
Okay.
And the air moves differently through them. So see, I give you a composition lesson and a little tuba.
Oh, that's great. Well, I can think of at least one tuba player in our program who will take that, the tuba can play anything the trumpet can, to heart. So I'm thinking of my tuba players out there that are thinking, challenge accepted right now.
Good. Excellent. Because you know what? It's very much like gymnastics. Now you're going to wonder, how am I getting there? in gymnastics, or even a better, well, gymnastics and ice and figure skating are great examples. Years and years ago, nobody did all the crazy things that we see them do now. You know, triple axels and quadruple axels and all that we take for granted now in figure skating at the highest level were unheard of until somebody did it. Same thing with a lot of the gymnastic moves, especially what we see in the floor routines. They were unheard of, getting that kind of air and height, until people figured out how to do it. Once you know in your mind, and this is a key thing for anything we do in life, once you know in your mind that something is possible, or once you've convinced yourself that it can be done, that's when you can do it. So this is how the progression of sports has happened. Miles get faster and faster. Gymnastics, figure skating, many things get more and more amazing every decade because of the pioneers who break through these ceilings of ability.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows the rest of us what's possible. So the coolest thing, by me saying to any tubist, hey, you can do anything the trumpet can, hopefully it puts that seed in your head thinking, I never really tried to perfect my fast playing and my tonguing. Yeah. Let me see what I can do now that I'm being told I should be doing that, or I can do that. It's a game changer. It's the same thing for me as a composer. I sit down and I remove all limitations. And I say to myself, getting back to what I talked about earlier about loving to write in all these different styles and genres, when I sit down to write a new piece, I free myself of any expectations. And I just say, what do I hear? What do I hear? And I don't worry about the rules and the regulations and whether I'm going to be approved of. I just go there, and that's when you take off.
Awesome. Grace, why don't you go ahead? I see from the chat that you had a question. Go ahead and ask your question, Grace.
Alrighty. My question was, so I play string bass. Is there anything that you could use with that to help with writing tuba at all?
Well, sure. I mean, well, in band, often those lines are doubled, as you probably know. You are the lonely bassist in your band, right? And so often composers will double that. The mechanics obviously are very, very different, but are you thinking of something in particular? I mean, you've got, pizzicato is the tuba staccato.
Yeah.
What are you thinking?
I don't know exactly. I was just like, maybe something, because I don't actually know.
You can do anything. Well, just think of it this way. Your lyrical line uses a bow, right? To go zoom, 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 zoom. And a tubist lyrical line uses their breath. And what I suggest to anybody is become the instrument that you're writing for. So are you saying you'd like to write for tuba?
Yeah, I sometimes write like small chamber stuff.
Yeah, fantastic. That's great. The best thing you can do, again, as I said, listen to a lot of music for the instruments you're writing for, but imagine that you are playing them. When I was writing the tuba sonata, I literally imagined, and I'm not a large person, I'm smaller than I look probably on the screen, and I imagined that I was holding the tuba and having it resonate against me. And by the way, when I wrote my double bass sonata, I imagined it's such a great instrument because you're wrapped around it and it's vibrating against you. Now, I cannot play the double bass. You are way up on me. I would love to be able to play it. I don't play the bass, but when I wrote my sonata, I imagined being wrapped around the instrument. It's a very rangy piece. So I took into account, that to get the high notes, that's going to change the player's position, all these things. You have to think about these things. I became the instruments when I was writing for them. It's very sensual. It's a beautiful thing. Music is physical. We're dealing with sound waves going through the air and hitting other people, hopefully in their hearts, but also in their sternums and in their core, physical being. And nothing is more spectacular than a big wind band playing together. And nobody knows that better than the conductor, right? Who is like getting blasted with that sound. The first time that you hit a downbeat and everybody suddenly plays, it's a very emotional feeling. It really is. So I think that's great that you want to write for tuba. Just listen to do you know the tubist in the band or in the school?
Yeah, I do.
Go sit down together, and I bet they'll be interested in learning about the bass too. You might get them writing for bass, but I think or you might write a duet. For a bass and tuba duet would be beautiful. So just think about that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got another student question here. They are wondering a little bit if you can explain what you mean by nonfiction music and nonfiction pieces. What is you? They noticed that you referenced that on your website.
Nonfiction. I think I was talking about my articles, not my
Oh,
music.
okay, okay,
But that's fine. Nonfiction meaning I write. I have a lot of published articles and some chapters and books and things like that. I love to write about the music industry and about copyright and artists' rights and equity and diversity issues and all kinds of things that are not fictional, meaning I'm not making up characters. I'm writing about factual or subjectively observed, issues of our day. So that's what that referenced in my bio. I think nonfiction writing, meaning
excellent.
essays. Yeah.
So can you talk? I mean, we know you as a composer primarily in this role, but you also talk about a lot of other roles like your photography and your writing and some of the other active. How do all of those things feed each other?
They really do. And I'm glad you asked that, because I always want to encourage people to see themselves as a whole integrated human being, as opposed to someone who just does this one thing, particularly well or whatever. You don't want to just be a composer, let's say, because that would, first of all, it would make you a really boring person. And second of all, if you're just a composer, you're not completing the feedback loop of, in order to pour out and express yourself, you have to fill up your vessel. And this is true for all of us as human beings, to be the best people that we can be and to bring out the best in other people, which I think is one of the goals of being a human being, is to bring out the best in everybody around you. To do that, you have to integrate into a holistic life with a lot of interests, ideally, and a lot of curiosity. Curiosity is a great word for everything and everyone around you, and what makes someone else, why are they interested in that thing, and ooh, let me check that out or whatever. And the more cross-referencing of interests that someone can do, I think the happier a life that they can have. In my case, even though I grew up in a very gritty city, I increasingly went to nature, and that just seems to be where I'm happiest. And now I live on a very remote island with 6,500 people, with no bridge. It's called San Juan Island. We're right on the Canadian border. You can see Canada right there. Um, it's much more wildlife than people, and that inspires me. And so I ended up taking up photography a while ago, and I take a lot of nature and wildlife photographs, and I post them, and some videos too, and I post them. The videos aren't so good. I haven't figured out how to be a great videographer, but some of the photos have won awards, and I start integrating that into my music. And one of the ways I do it, not for every piece, but I put together these photo montages and slideshow videos that actually people use when they are performing my music. If it's an appropriate one, I sync it up to the music, and I offer to them as a movie, basically, that plays along with the soundtrack of the wind band and the track. And it's really fun. So I've done a number of these. And that's an example of how to integrate things that you love and put them together. Chocolate and peanut butter. Ta-da! It's a Reese's peanut butter cup. So there's so many things. The same thing with activism. I've been very involved in my community, both in and outside of music. I think the two main areas have been civil liberties work and music, and advocacy for people. And in both of those cases, it's incredibly rewarding to help other people, one hopes, or to learn about issues and be able to share awareness about them, and then integrate that when appropriate back into music. I've got some pieces that address climate change, that address address issues that matter to people outside of the music world, that address the health of our seas and our creatures. I've got one recent one that premiered based on the text of Anne Boleyn. If you guys have studied Henry VIII, that she was the doomed second wife that he had beheaded because he was bored with her and wanted to marry Jane Seymour. Wife number 3 ended up a divorcee too. He had 3 more to go after that. He was a busy guy. But at any rate, when I wrote, I found this amazing text from Anne Boleyn that she wrote while she was awaiting her beheading in the Tower of London. Ooh, think about that. And it's called "Oh Death, Rock Me Asleep." Well, I did some research, and because I was curious about, what other women were writing at that time, not many. And then I also was keenly aware, as some of you are, that horrible human rights violations and violations against women continue every day in some countries around the world. So I ended up using this piece as a way to focus on the rights of women who are abused, who are murdered by their governments or by men or whatever, to this day. They're stoned and they're set on fire and even beheaded to this day. So that's heavy stuff, right? But it's stuff we can kind of all get behind. I don't think it's controversial to most of us that women should not be abused. So I use my music as a vehicle to be able to write about that. And most importantly is that the music has to be excellent. It stands on itself I'm not saying if anybody else likes it, but it's excellent to my standards. And it has to stand on its own as a piece of art. But the fact that I can also raise awareness about things, whether it's the sea creatures, women, global climate change, any of these things, if I can raise awareness by giving a piece of music that also has what we call a program, which is a story behind it, that's a good thing. And that's an example of integrating oneself, not just being a stick figure composer on legs, she just sits here and writes music, but connecting the dots and connecting it to other things that might have meaning to people. So I know that was a very long-winded answer, but I get excited about this because I want to encourage everybody to think in broad terms about the things, whatever it is. We're not talking about music, but about whatever it is that really interests you. It's interconnected to a lot of other things too. And that will
it's
become more and more
fantastic.
evident. Yeah.
So you're inspired by a lot of your surroundings, and all of the things that you do seems to feed back into the composition, and then vice versa. Just to kind of bring it full circle a little bit, was there anything deeper that inspired Off the Edge to it, or was it just from a different direction completely? Was there an experience or a certain band from the 80s 90s genre that really drove you to create that piece?
I think the thing that drove me, that one does not have deep activist meaning at all. But in December, I mentioned before, I love to dance, and I joined a whole bunch of friends in Chicago. There's this big thing that Lauren knows called the Midwest Clinic, which is a really big conference for music people. About almost 20,000 people go to this. Anyway, one night I joined a whole bunch of friends at a dance club that was just blasting this kind of thump, 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 EDM music. And I was having such a great time, and I loved the people that I was around and with. And it just, I don't know, I was thinking, I can make that experience. I can do something, kind of light and fun like that. Play the track really loud, get people just sort of, bopping up and down. So that is literally the very, uninteresting but true explanation of where Off the Edge came from. I was in a bar, and no, I was not drinking heavily or anything like that. I was just enjoying, hearing the music and with my friends. And that's where it led to Off the Edge.
Fantastic.
Why not? I don't know if there's an EDM piece out there like that for bands. Now there is.
There. Excellent. All right, students, this is going to be our last call for questions. Does anybody have any questions that you would like to ask Alex before we do our lightning round here at the very end? Last call if you've got one on the group chat. Kenny, go ahead and unmute your mic and ask your question.
Okay. My question is, do you like any other popular composers, like, for example, Hans Zimmer, John Powell, like John Williams? And have you been inspired by any of them?
I think, well, it's interesting you name film composers, and and I'm totally inspired by film music. I've often said for many years that I think some of our best and most compelling music at times comes from the film composers. That lush orchestration and that use of emotion is stunning. Thomas Newman has always been a favorite of mine, for example. And everybody you mentioned. I mean, there's really the people who are Alexandre Desplat, they are Laura Cartman, Miriam Cutler. There are some really terrific, Rachel Portman. There are a lot of terrific composers out there. too many to mention. And in the pop world too, I'm a real big fan, probably no surprise looking behind me, of Imogen Heap. If you don't know her stuff, check it out. She is not only a wonderful songwriter and composer, but a terrific engineer. She's won Grammys for her producing and engineering as well. And she's also a terrific advocate. I got to fangirl her. I was in a meeting in Warsaw, Poland, of all things, a year or two ago, with her, and in a very small committee meeting. And I was like, oh my gosh, you know, I'm with Imogen Heap. I was totally fangirling. It was great. Anyway, so, and Radiohead and Tom York now solo. I mean, that stuff is just incredibly beautiful to me. I love that. So
Great.
yeah.
Students, anybody else? Last call? All right, well, we're gonna finish out with our lightning round then. We like doing a little lightning round just to finish things out. So just some real quick favorites. So do you have a favorite instrument to compose with or for?
Piano. I'm sorry, wind band people, but I'm a pianist and I love composing on piano. I've got a CD of my complete piano music coming out later this year, as a matter of fact. So I love piano, but I love the wind instruments too, and the string instruments.
Do you have other, sidebar, do you have any other albums of things of you performing your own music?
None of me performing my own music, including this. This one is written performed by Adam Marks. But if you go onto my website and go under the recordings, you'll see a whole bunch of recordings, and most of them you can download on iTunes, whatever. Yeah.
Okay. So we did favorite instrument. How about favorite composition?
Oh God, that's a tough one. It's like children. You have 12 children or something, you know, how do you say which is your favorite? They're all your favorite in different ways because no two are alike. I do love a wind band piece that is now for orchestra as well, that features a Pacific humpback whale, is called Beneath, and it's the third movement of Immersion. And if you go onto my website, you guys can hear it. I basically used the plaintive, haunting song of a Pacific humpback whale in the context of a symphonic wind band piece. So
awesome.
Beneath.
Do you have a favorite place that your music has taken you to, a place that you've traveled to?
Right in here, you know, I think that's the great thing about being musicians is we can take ourselves wherever we want to go, inside of ourselves. I've done, if you mean literally, I've traveled all over the world and I've been so fortunate. I used to travel an enormous amount. But I think my favorite place is inside, right in here, you know.
Excellent.
That's why I like to sleep, because I love to dream. Dreaming is like the best. You go on these wild rides and then you wake up.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I think that about wraps it up. And I know we're running out of time because you've got another meeting, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Lauren, thank you so much for having me in. And I want to let everybody know, as Lauren does, that I just uploaded a new live recording of Off the Edge from a middle school in Indiana, that if you go onto the site or you'll pass it out or whatever, if you haven't already, you guys can hear it live instead of the demo and get an even better sense of it. So
yeah, I will definitely share that.
You're doing this. You guys are the first ones to be doing it virtually and remotely. If you end up putting it together, definitely let me in on it. Zoom me back in to talk with you and to listen
to absolutely. Yeah, we're looking to, with everything being the way that it is, things are a little up in the air at the moment, but we have the parts out and we're hoping to record it and put together some kind of virtual band compilation together, and just thrilled that you're giving us this opportunity and looking forward to performing your music and hopefully sharing it with you in the future as well.
I'm excited, and thank you so much for being part of a new piece. You know, commissioning is a huge thing, and to be part of creating a catalog and a repertoire for the future is really a wonderful thing. So thank you all for bringing this piece to life. It's very exciting for me. So, and you, Lauren, you got the new score and parts, right? That
I did, yep. And I will definitely distribute those. I haven't had the chance to distribute them yet, but we'll definitely get those out.
For you saxophone players, you will be happy because I gave you more notes. I gave you more notes to play.
Awesome.
So anyway, thanks so much, guys.
Thank you, Alex. Take care, and we'll certainly be in touch.
Okay, bye.
Take care.